Good morning, everyone. And thanks for your patience, especially for the colleagues joining us online, but we still had a few technical issues that we needed to surmount. But there we are. Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Kuiper. I'm Associate Director here at the European Policy Center. And it's really a pleasure today to welcome you to this event. And many thanks to the Welsh government for making this happen. Today, we're celebrating three meaningful occasions. We're celebrating St. David's Day, Wales National Day, that is traditionally marked on the 1st of March. So I understood that on Sunday this week, the start of the week, there were a lot of festivities and activities happening, but actually the whole week still is dedicated to the celebration of St. David's Day. So congratulations to all, of course, Welsh colleagues in the room and to everyone involved. But we also, which is a very important point of input for our discussions today, we mark the 10th anniversary of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015, which is really a landmark piece of legislation and I believe a great source of inspiration also for the intergenerational fairness strategy that as we speak this morning, Commissioner Mikalev is launching. So that will be very important input for our conversations during the Fireside chat. So together these anniversaries really offer a moment for reflection and further discussion. And therefore it's my honor to welcome three distinguished guests. Our Future Generation Commissioner, Derek Walter. Derek, it's a pleasure to see you again because we met a few years ago. So I'm also very interested to hear where you stand now and what it means for today's world and intergenerational solidarity. So welcome back to the European Policy Center. We also have with us Philippe Lamberts, the Special Advisor to the European Commissioner President. Mr. Lambert, it's a pleasure to have you with us as well. And we have Lloyd Harris, the Head of Sustainable Development at the Welsh Government. So, Lloyd, it's also great to have you with us, and you will be part of the panel later on. I already alluded to the fact that the broader significance of the Welsh experience is that it's not limited to a single policy area. It really provides a holistic framework covering social, environmental, cultural, economic, and territorial cohesion. And by embedding long-term thinking into decision-making, it represents a truly systematic approach to governance. And this really makes Wales a reference point for other local authorities, regions, and I also believe European member states. So the aim of today's event is to showcase the Welsh best practice and to inspire others. Secondly, we also would like to demonstrate and also discuss how intergenerational fairness can be translated from principle into everyday policymaking. And I believe this is a very important point, especially in a point in time where we see that a lot of trade-offs are happening in the political context, with security for good reason, also with a war raging in the Middle East right now taking front and center. But it's very important also to see how intergenerational fairness is still important and should be part of any holistic vision on policymaking. So we really would like to encourage reflection on how similar approaches could be adapted across different regions and countries within the EU and Europe. And therefore, those of you coming to the EPC know how we usually work and what the format looks like. We first will have Derek for a keynote speech, so we're very interested to hear your perspective on all of these matters. And then we will have a fireside chat where I will moderate a conversation between Philippe Lambert and Lloyd Harris. But of course, I'm also very interested in your perspective because I know that we have policymakers here in the room. We have a lot of you that are working on these issues. So I really also do encourage and invite you to come in during the Q&A. And I will do that as spontaneous as possible. So please come in with your comments and your questions. So with that, I hope that we solved the practical issues because Derek has a few slides that, of course, we're keen to show you, also for our colleagues online to have a look at the slides. If not, then probably we can do it without slides and share them later with you. Does it work, or shall we share the slides later?
We'll share the slides later.
Yeah, okay, well, we improvise, so we will share the slides later with you. So with that, Derek, again, it's a pleasure to have you with us. We're looking forward to your perspective and also discuss later on the issues that you will raise during our fireside chat. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Bore da pawb, good morning, bonjour. It's a real pleasure to be joining you this morning. Our National Day, as you've heard, is on the 1st of March, St. David, but we're spending a few days in Brussels to talk about our patron saint, St. David, and to mark that occasion. St. David is known for his phrase, to do the small things. And if you do the small things, they can be important and they can add up to a much bigger impact and a bigger whole. And I think, that's an important part of the work that we do through the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, to make sure we're taking urgent, important, but also sometimes small steps in the right direction to a bigger positive future for Wales. So what I'm going to do with my opening remarks is just to share a little bit about Wales's story, what we did, why we did it, and the impact it's making, and then share some lessons from Wales, from our experience of over 10 years of this legislation, and hopefully that can be useful to others taking similar approaches in other parts of Europe. But I often ask people to start by thinking about the youngest person you know. I think this is an important way of thinking about what we're doing here. Think about the youngest person you know. I think about my niece. She's 12. She lives in Cwmbran, where I was brought up in South Wales, in an industrial town in the south of Wales, not a wealthy area at all. She struggles at school. She hates most vegetables. She's passionate about football, soccer, and she's very good at it. Well, I think of her when I do this job, because this is about doing the right thing for me today, but it's also making sure the decisions that we take when I've left this planet are right for her to have a happy and prosperous future. I think it's really important to hold on to the people that we're working to support when we're taking action for future generations. It can sometimes feel ephemeral, distant, something we can't hold on to. But those future generations are here today, and they are your children, your grandchildren, and that helps bring home, I think, this important agenda when we are talking more generally about it. So, I tell you what we did. So back in 2015 and the years running up to that, there was a lot going on, wasn't there, with the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the reasons that Wales introduced the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in 2015 was to understand, or to think about what Wales could do to play our part in delivering on this global agenda. What can we do as a small country, small country doing the small things to make a difference globally for the long-term prosperity and health and survival of our planet? So we had a national conversation with the people of Wales called the Wales We Want conversation. This is at the same time, remember, that the United Nations was having the World We Want conversation. We had the Wales We Want conversation. And we brought people together in a way that we had not done previously, and we haven't done since, to ask them about the future that they wanted for their country. Where do you want to be in 25 years, in 50 years? What should we be focusing in terms of getting there? And that national conversation led to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It put in place perhaps the most comprehensive framework for sustainable development that exists in the world. And it's set in place, and I would have had a slide to show this, but I'll talk it through with you. It's set in place 7 long-term goals for our country. So I've got the SDG badge on now. In Wales, we've got 7 goals, 7 well-being goals, setting the direction that all of us are taking for the success of our country in the long term. We also put in place a framework of, well, we now have 50 indicators and measures of success to tell us how well we're doing. And we have 5 ways of working, which are the behaviours and culture that we expect our public bodies to be taking. So let me break that down in a bit more detail. The goals are really interesting in themselves. So we have a goal around culture and the Welsh language. Many countries look at well-being and the dimensions of well-being. They look at the economy, they look at society, look at the environment. Not often do you see culture, the 4th dimension of well-being, incorporated into a framework for well-being. And there are campaigns to improve this at the global level, at the UN. But Wales does hold on to its culture, and we do have that as a key part of our well-being approach. In fact, we have a goal to have 1 million Welsh speakers, that's 1/3 of our population, by 2050 speaking our Welsh language. That's one of the aspects of our work. But also, if you look at our Prosperous Wales goal, you won't see any reference to GDP. This is about a broader well-being economy approach to the success of our economy, not just judging it by GDP. That's part of the picture, but understanding that a well-being economy is much broader than that. So the goals set a direction that are different from other countries and that guide our public sector to take different decisions because of the direction we've set ourselves. And then let me tell you a bit about the behaviours, because actually in doing this role, I've learned that the behaviours, the 5 ways of working, are actually the key way in which we bring about change. If we see our public sector organisations delivering the 5 ways of working, we see the different decisions, the urgency, the change that we need to take place. So this is about, I need to remember these and get them right. Prevention, so thinking about what you're doing, how can it prevent problems arising before they've taken place? How can you do things in an integrated way? So this is no longer, right to be working in our silos. How can we work across different policy areas to achieve our collective aims? These are not just aims for one part of our public sector, they're goals for all of us. How can we do this in a collaborative way that makes sense? Partnership, working together, so not just silo working, but also partnership working. Thinking long term, so everything that we do has to be taking a long-term lens. And then crucially, involving people in Wales in the decisions that are affecting them. We are seeing right across Europe, and certainly we're seeing in Wales, greater opposition to some of the change that we need to make to get to net zero, to restore our nature. If we don't listen to people, bring them with us, talk about their legitimate concerns and find solutions that they support, we are not going to make the necessary progress that we need to make towards our well-being goals. So those 5 ways of working are a really important part of this. It takes a lot longer to say this if there's not a slide to say this, but basically the legislation applies to the public sector, so we have 56 public sector organisations in Wales, but we need our private sector and our civil society to also work towards the same goals, and we see that happen. But because of the devolution settlement, because the way the powers lie within Wales, the Welsh Government doesn't have the power to apply this legislation to the to civil society and the private sector. But we do see their buy-in, and we need that for this positive approach that we take. And I should say something about my role. I'm the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. I'm an independent role, and I have an office that supports our public sector to deliver on this legislation. I'm there to advise, I'm there to scrutinise and monitor their progress. I can undertake reviews or investigations if there are problems where we need to find solutions. I'm not part of government. I'm an independent role, and that's part of an important part of the scrutiny here. It's an important part of our democratic process. My mandate is Future Generations, and I'm advocating for their interests to make sure all that they do is considered in the way that we work. So it's an all-encompassing framework for delivering on well-being and sustainable development. We have skills and capacity programs to support our public sector on to deliver this. It's not good enough for them to expect them to do it without giving them the skills to do so. We produce future trends reports and annual updates. A future trends report letting the public sector know, what are the big issues affecting Wales and how are they going to be panning out over the years ahead. We produce annual reports called the Wellbeing of Wales Report, which is effectively a State of the Nation report. How well have we done over the last year in delivering on our long-term goals? So that's our approach. I humbly share it because it won't work in every context. It doesn't make sense in every country. We see countries around the world taking different approaches and focusing on different things, and that's got to be right. That's right for their context. But this is working in our context, and this is what works in Wales. So what difference does it make? This is the question I get asked all the time. This is very laudable, Derek. This is brilliant that we've got this legislation. Who could disagree with this approach? But what difference does it make? And I think it's important to frame this, and we do deliberately. We frame this in a way, what difference it makes for future generations, but what difference is it also making for people today? We need to show that the difference it's making the short, medium, and the long term. So I'll give you some examples of the change that this has led to take place in Wales. It has resulted in a significant shift in our transport policy. Now, if you were to come to Wales today, and the young people that are with me from the Future Generations Leadership Academy will testify to this, I think. If you were to go to Wales today and go on to our transport system, you would realise it's not fit for future generations yet. But we've seen a massive shift in our funding. So something like 2/3 of our capital funding for transport used to be spent on roads. Now 2/3 of it is spent on public transport and active travel, walking and cycling. So that's a big change. We've introduced 20 miles per hour, 30-kilometre default speed limits right across Wales, which is reducing road casualties and road deaths. And other initiatives have now led to a shift in increasing numbers using public transport, buses and trains, which is clearly the right thing that we need to do for future generations. That's the sustainable choice. And this shift came about and was inspired by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. In fact, one of the big political moments of recent years was the decision not to invest in a motorway extension around one of our cities in South Wales, and the First Minister said at the time, the reason I didn't give that the go-ahead, one of the key reasons was because it's not in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's not the right thing to do for future generations. I'll give you another example. It's led to more ambition in terms of what we do in terms of waste, reuse, recycling. We're second in the world in terms of our recycling rates. And we're very proud of that. We want to be the first. I think the first country in the world is actually Austria. So we're keen to improve on where we are at the moment. But, that ambition came about because of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But the most interesting thing about, I think, our waste policy and the way in which the lens of this legislation has applied to that waste policy is not because of the ambition around reuse and recycling. It's because of the integration. So if you look at our waste strategy, the Welsh Government's waste strategy, it also talks about how can we do this in a way that strengthens community cohesion, that involves communities in delivering on this programme of work. How can we do this in a way that also supports our Welsh language objectives? So we have this long-term lens, but we all have this breadth through the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is resulting in policies that we wouldn't have seen happen in that way if it hadn't been for the way in which this legislation applies. A third example is perhaps an area where I'm particularly giving my focus is on the wider determinants of health. So we spend a lot of our budget on acute healthcare, dealing with people who are already sick. And my team and I are working with our public bodies to look at the extent in which their budgets are being spent on prevention. Actually, when the NHS, the National Health Service, was set up in the UK, it was all about keeping our population healthy. It's actually now become a service that's just supporting people who are unwell to get better. And so that is not the original intention, and we cannot go on like that. Some of our long-term health trends in Wales are very worrying. We have some of the highest obesity levels in the UK, for example. So we need to make a change. So working through the lens of this legislation, and working not just with our health service, but working with our public sector more generally, we're asking them to look at the wider determinants of health. Something like 20% of our health outcomes is to do with the health service. The rest is whether we have clean air, whether we have a strong community, whether we have access to good quality food, whether we have a job. You know, those are the factors that make a big difference in our health. And why aren't we spending more of our budget on those areas of work? And that's one of the big drives that I'm that I'm supporting to take place. So through my job, it's my job to speak truth to power. And, there's some great stuff by Welsh Government and others, but there are areas of gaps and oversight, or areas that are perhaps difficult to concentrate on, that are important, that are politically difficult. Well, I give a focus on those things, and I ask them to focus on those things, and I give them the backing to focus on those things and help them with the solutions through this role. So, that's a quick overview of the legislation. I've given you the rose-tinted view of this legislation. Clearly, it's not perfect. 10 years on, we want to review the legislation to see how we can improve it. It's much more carrot than it is stick. So it would be very difficult for any of us to take a public body to court to say, this is not in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And so we want you to make a change, because it's a framework legislation. It can be interpreted in different ways, but it is driving change, and it is a positive vision for our country, which requires urgency, which requires focus, and which requires all of us to work together if we're going to be successful in achieving it. What would the lessons be that I would share? A few things, I think. I think the legislation is important, but it's not enough in itself. Just having legislation is not going to bring about the change that we need. It's part of the picture. We're very pleased we've got this legislation, but it's not enough in itself. I still have to continue to make the case why this is important. A frequent conversation I will have of a leader of a council or a health board is, Derek, this is great. I love this, support this. But, we've got to get on with the day job. These waiting lists that we need to be dealing with. When we sort that, we'll get to the long-term stuff. Well, we know, that day never comes. I've been in work 30 years. There's never been that place where suddenly everything's sorted and we need to get to the long-term. We have to do the now and the future all at the same time. We have no choice. What are the options? Just gets more expensive, more difficult, and we reduce the options and life choices of our future generations. So that's one thing. The law is super important. I think the wide framework that we've got in Wales is something also to point to. The fact that we've got the framework of the goals, the ways of working, the information, the scrutiny, the targets, the indicators, gives us a robustness and a roundness. There are areas of weakness which I can talk about perhaps later, but that broad, comprehensive approach I think is a unique feature of Wales, and it works for us. A third lesson I would say is this involving of people. If we are expecting change and it has to come through my office, or it just has to happen, by our government, we're not going to make enough change in an urgent enough way. So by involving people, by having that national conversation, by properly engaging the people of Wales in this work, we have created a community of activists who are challenging and asking their public sector organisations to take different interest in the interests of future generations. So that's an important part. You know, we want a town hall meeting, you know, when I can't be there, for an individual to get up and say, well, I was part of the Wales We Want conversation, and I want you to tell me, councillors, how this decision is in line with the future generations. How can you justify this? How have you considered this legislation? And that is really how we make this important change. So there are other lessons as well, which I'm pleased to be sharing perhaps through the conversation. So that's our story. We're super proud to be sharing that during the week of St. David. St. David was on the 1st of March, St. David's Day. We want to strengthen our relationships across Europe and beyond. We remain European, and we know that we will make the most progress if we can learn about solutions and action taking place in other countries that we can bring back to Wales. It really helps me to be able to say, we may be a pioneer in the approach that we're taking, but we're not an outlier. Look at all these other communities and countries that are taking similar steps, and look at what they're delivering in the interest of future generations, and why can't we do that too? So I'll end it there. So thank you very much for your patience and your time. And we will share the slides that I was going to show you, which illustrate the points that I was making. But really looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you so much, Derek. It's very inspiring, even though you mentioned this may be a rose-tinted vision, you may be a pioneer, but I believe that, especially in the current policy context, and that will be part of the conversation we're going to have now, it's so important to invest in societal resilience, because after all, only if we invest in people and planet, we are really also better positioned to be prepared for everything that comes when it comes to security and defense. So you cannot disentangle the two. The two really need to go together. And I think you illustrated just now with quite a few concrete examples how we do that. And I was also very happy that you brought us back to the Sustainable Development Goals, because with everything going on in the world, and also the fact that the multilateral order is not working as it used to be, it is still very important to see how have we achieved progress and how are we going to go about it also for the future. So many thanks for these inspiring words. With that, I would perhaps welcome our speakers, Philippe Lamberts and Lloyd Harris, to come to the podium to join me for the conversation. As I mentioned, Philippe Lamberts is Special Advisor to the Commission President, so that's a very important role these days. And Lloyd Harris, you're Head of Sustainable Development at the Welsh Government. And let me perhaps start where I ended my conversation after Derek's speech, and perhaps start with you, Philippe. We're very happy to have you, because you have been a long-standing advocate of the work on the well-being economy. Here at the European Policy Centre, we're also doing a lot of work. We're involved in 2 big Horizon Europe programs, where we also work on indicators. So that's perhaps also an issue, Lloyd, that I would like to come back to you, because Derek mentioned the importance of indicators. But we, at the same time, have also noticed, together with the stakeholders that we're working with, that bringing the well-being economy or intergenerational fairness, depending on which definition you use these days, is not so easy, because instead of holistic policy making, we see a lot of focus on specific policy areas. I alluded to defense and security, there's competitiveness, and even though I would argue that a holistic vision on all of these is important, people would probably say these days, well, but you have to focus. You only can invest your money once. So how would you go about the trade-offs between policy areas, and what do you think are the important lessons for the EU as we speak?
Well, that's quite a big question. Putting the
the cursor at the right place is actually the gist of what the democratic debate should be about. Because indeed, it's never black and white. And of course, that requires, I would say, to have a solid compass. When I listen to you, Derek, that's really the image that I had, is knowing which direction we want to go, and then try to connect every decision that we take in every domain to that compass. And indeed, I insist that a compass is not a GPS. The compass gives you the direction, and you have to have that. But the GPS takes into account the morphology of the terrain, the circumstances, and it's very rarely a straight line from A to B, right? Getting to a sustainable society, a well-being economy, is certainly not a straight line. What I can say is that policymakers often respond to pressure from society, and we should actually be glad about this, because that's also core to democracy. Well, of course, at the other side of the pond or east of Europe, it's different, but at least in Europe, it's still about that. And I'd like to reflect a bit as to how intergenerational fairness can happen, because indeed, one may argue, when we look at wealth distribution, when we look about access to housing, when we look about mental health, we can basically say that indeed political decision-making is not necessarily tilted towards future generations. And you spoke about indicators. I think we have enough indicators that point to that. So let's not invent new ones. We have all the data we need to spot the problems where they are. But now let me reflect a minute on this moment when I think the most ambitious political decision has been taken that was really geared towards the future generation, and that's the launching of the European Green Deal back in 2019. How did it happen? Well, it happened because there was pressure from society. There was mobilization. That is the reason, even though, and I need to remind people all the time about that, it was launched by the current president of the European Commission out of a firm belief that this is what needs to be done. And she did that unsolicited by the Parliament and the Council. Yet we found majorities for the whole duration of the last term in support of those policies. And actually, we still find majorities. In the current circumstances, it's more difficult, but we still manage. But we managed because there was pressure from society. And if I can take a counterexample of that, well, you reminded us that the UK is no longer part of the European Union. I would argue that this goes strongly against the interest of the young generations in the UK. They didn't vote. They didn't vote. And indeed, one might say, yeah, but why is taxation policy or social security policy so much tilted towards my generation and not so much for the young generations? Well, because my generation is voting. And that does make a difference. It does make a participation, you said. Well, that's one form of participation. I would not argue that voting is the only form of participation, but it's a very important one. And this is what allows then, when there are competing pressures, I would say, this is what allows to have the cursor put in a better place. Just imagine that if the only pressure we get is the new imperialism from the West and from the East, and there are no countervailing pressures reminding us that, well, actually, we have to take care about climate, we have to take care about mental health of young generations. If there's no pressure, then everything goes towards geopolitics. And geopolitics are absolutely important, but they are not the only determinant of well-being. I would argue that having been in politics for the last 16 years, you find people really, how should I say, Caring for well-being, well, I would say it's hard to find a policymaker telling you that he or she is not interested in the well-being of the people. But then the question is, okay, is that limited to basically per capita GDP? Actually not, and we have, again, plenty of evidence that this is not enough. And so we have to look across the board. And then again, it comes not just from scientific evidence, it comes from popular pressure pushing in this or that direction. That will help steering the boat of our societies in a direction that is more conducive to intergenerational fairness.
Thanks so much, Philippe. Let me turn to you, Lloyd, because I was intrigued, Derek, when you stressed your independence and also your independence from the government, and especially when it comes to all these implementation questions about how do we go about certain policies. You, of course, you're a government representative, so I would like to hear from you. How do you see it, and what's the difference between Derek's role and also implementing the strategy then from a government perspective?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously Derek's role is accountability, training, lots of that aspects. In government, we're trying to deliver policies alongside a lot of our public bodies, 56, and other partners outside of the public sector as well, the voluntary sector and the private sector. On the kind of holistic approach to policies, what does that mean? Well, the Act isn't asking us to come up with any new policies. Derek mentioned waste management. Waste management's done internationally. Wales isn't unique in doing waste management. What is unique is the way that policy had an excuse or had a framework under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act to not just think about it in a singular way. It wasn't, its objectives, the Beyond Recycling strategy, weren't just to eradicate waste. That was a big part of it, obviously, and is the key purpose. But by using the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act framework, it meant it could go beyond that. It could go into, as Derek said, communities. It can go into Welsh language. And I think in government, that's really important in that 10 years may sound like a long time of the Act, but trust me, in culture change terms, it's not a long time. People, and whether that's officials or politicians or non-governmental groups and environmental groups, have a way of working that's worked to some degrees. And to change that, it takes a long time. And part of the role that we're trying to do in government is not just bring in the legislation and ask people to do it, is to try and help how you do that. And having policies like Beyond Recycling and the waste management is really, really important as a demonstration of that. I mean, Derek's mentioned it today in promoting it to an international audience, but we all equally can use that internally within government, within public bodies on here's how you do bring a holistic, interactive, involving policy to, for example, people working in health, people who are working in education, even subjects which might not naturally be linked to kind of sustainability. So, for example, procurement. That's an area which may seem, not naturally linked to climate change or sustainability, but how can we bring long-term thinking? How can we bring involvement into our public body sectors when doing this really important thing of spending taxpayers' public money in a way that thinks long-term, thinks not just about the cheapest or the greatest value for money, but thinks of value for money in a way that's thinking about the well-being of its people, the well-being of future generations. So you're not just building short-term housing, for example, you're building housing that will be fit for decades, there's centuries to come. Climate adaptation is obviously becoming a massive aspect of that. So I think just to round that off, government and the Commissioner's Office do work hand in hand. We're separate in a lot of ways, but I think what government can do is walk the walk and show that policies can be done in this way. Here's how we do it. And now 10 years on, how do we then get to the next step of doing that across the board? So not just on these specific flagship policies, but on all policies that we embed.
Perhaps one quick follow-up question, because I know from my own experience, also having worked for government, that if you want to work more holistically, very often you need to change the way that governments operate, because oftentimes there's different departments that have their way of working, that are organized in silos. And even though conceptually everyone would agree with the examples you just gave, in practice, making people work together is very difficult. It's very different. So have you changed, or has the act changed the way that the government functions these days?
It's still changing. We have just finished a cycle of a strategy called the Continuous Learning and Improvement Plan, which was actually brought about because the previous commissioner did a review of Welsh government's practices and culture change and found that it was, quite frankly, lacking in bringing in the Act's changes. And so that had 50 actions about how we change, and that's bringing in aspects on budgetary decisions. So being collaborative, not working in silos, being integrated across government when making these budgetary decisions. There's obviously a learning and development or training aspect to this. Not everyone understands what we're trying to do because they live busy lives and they're working on their policies. If you can make it real and practical to those people and say in your day-to-day, it's not kind of anything rocket science or anything new, to involve people isn't just doing a consultation and kind of getting the usual suspects, and by usual suspects I mean politically engaged kind of lobby groups or NGOs who are already aware of the situation, but actually bringing in those people who maybe aren't politically engaged but will be impacted hugely or have a big say on the policy that you're bringing in. It takes time, it takes resource, it also takes skills and knowledge. And I think where we're going to is now not why are we doing this, but how are we doing it? How can we do it properly? How can we do involvement where it does bring in those diverse groups from different backgrounds, from different communities, from different levels of political engagement? I would say some of it's individuals and some of it's systems. We're just working with the Commissioner's Office, getting there on our spending reviews, trying to be more collaborative. So not just having budgetary colleagues making decisions on a budget value for money basis, but bringing in colleagues working on climate change, on education, bringing in the children's voice and young people's voice, which is really hard to represent within a government system because you haven't got many children and young people working as civil servants or politicians in government. How can we use external bodies who represent those groups to bring in that voice when making these decisions? It's not easy. We're still there. One of the problems with being, I guess, as Derek said, a pioneer of this kind of working is that we're learning from ourselves and learning from international institutions as well. But I think that shift from why to how is really important. I meet loads of officials who don't even realize they're doing a lot of this stuff. They don't realize that they're collaborating or involving people. And when you say, actually, you are, and here's some techniques to help you do it even better, it kind of opens their eyes up to policy making.
I think it's an excellent point you make, and it also goes to show that also at EU level, a lot of these issues are the same. So, Mr. Lambert, also at EU level, we have very frequently the question about, well, how? Because every time when a new commissioner presents itself, it says, well, we are not longer going to work in silos. I remember that previous Commissioner President Juncker, I believe it was in 2015, so about the same time, literally said that in his opening speech, like, my commission is not going to work in silos anymore. I believe von der Leyen said something similar. So these are questions that we really also can relate to at EU level. Then in addition, there's the question about competence, because more critical voices would say, well, indeed, no politician would be against intergenerational fairness, but what is the added value of the EU? I also know from engagement with the commissioners Mikalev Kabler that we had leading to the presentation of the strategy today, that they say, well, this is the question that we get most. So from where you stand and advising the Commission President, how can today's political leaders overcome these challenges?
Well, let me start with what you said. Well, what's the added value of the EU? Let me counter by another question. How better off would be even Germany, the most populated country, on its own? I mean, if you really want to talk about well-being of the people, in the world we're in today, a world where might is right replaces the rule of law, keeping sovereignty is a foundational element So self-determination is a foundational element of well-being. If you want to preserve it, well, sorry, but there's no alternative than sticking together. So if anyone has a more powerful argument, well, I stand my ground. I mean, there's no way we can, well, size matters, sorry. Size matters, it does, right? So if you want to be played by others, be my guest. If Germany is not big enough, Belgium or the Walloon region is certainly not big enough, right? So we have to start by looking at the world as it is. That's number one. Number two, silo thinking. You know, before being a politician, I worked 22 years in a big company, in a very big company. So at its max, it was 400,000 people. This is where I learned what bureaucracy is. And in big organizations, you cannot avoid silos because indeed, otherwise it's not manageable. And the problem is that with silos come power plays and power games. And this is where indeed leadership does matter. Leadership does matter, and well, that's what the president tries to do, is to bring the pieces together. We are releasing today not just the intergenerational strategy, but we are publishing today the Industrial Accelerator Act. And I read articles in the press saying, "Oh, look, it has been postponed 3 times." Yes, it was postponed 3 times because we wanted to have time for internal bridge building and building a solid agreement within the Commission. So you need to give the space for debate, and I much prefer a text that has a robust support, and that takes a bit more time to be built than rushing to something because we committed on a date and then it falls apart the date's published. So consensus building takes time, but that is time well spent, because again, the logic of silos is inevitable because, well, managing the world, the society is so multifaceted that, well, you need indeed focus on education, on defense, on all sorts of things. But then indeed, it needs to be part of a consistent strategy. And this is where the compass really matters. That everyone is working in his or her department, but at least we share a common compass. And again, let me insist on that, because I also hear a lot, well, you know, the European Green Deal, that was previous term, it's gone. Hang on one second. What will be a key element of the Industrial Accelerator Act, and you do not hear green in IAA, there's no G, well, it's actually the fact that we are greening our industry and we want to do it with European contents. It's still there. It's still there. And actually, that was a bit of a surprise to me that you mentioned that culture change takes time, but I was surprised entering the European Commission how mainstream this idea of the green transformation has become. Now, the question is how fast, what are the best methods, and should we take into account the fact that, well, because of competitive pressures, we need to scale down this part of the ambition or find another way? Yes, sure, but these are all legitimate debates to be had. But again, the basic direction of travel has not changed. Now, there's still areas of progress, obviously, but again, the common compass is what really matters. When you lose that, then indeed it becomes, well, power plays reign supreme. And one last point I want to say also, if you want stability in policy making, you absolutely need broad support in society, but also in the across the political spectrum. If you have narrow majorities, if 51% of the people or 51% of the MPs or MEPs want something, I bet you that after the next election, this 51% will have become 47, and then it's change of direction. If you want stability in policy making, you need broad majorities in society, and that should be reflected, of course, in the political spectrum. And building that takes, well, at least 2 things: time and the spirit of, you mentioned it, cooperation. That indeed it is not I win, you lose, because, well, I'm party A and you are party B. It is actually, we can deliver stuff that benefits even politically all the components of the all deal makers basically, and that spirit is absolutely essential if we want to strive towards a well-being economy. Otherwise, it's going to be a win-lose economy, and we've seen enough of that, I think.
I'm sure that leads to a lot of reflections from your side as well. So I promised you to come in. So let me give you that opportunity. So let me see who would like to ask a question at this point during the conversation. And also because we have some colleagues online, so perhaps my colleague Michaela is monitoring the questions online. Is there anyone who would like to come in at this point? If not, perhaps keep that thought and I will come back to you later to see to what extent you have comments or questions. Because Lloyd, I would like to come back to you because you rightly said, Mr. Lambert, we have enough indicators. At the same time, as technical as it sounds, indicators are very important. As EPC, we're involved in Merge, which, as the name says, is trying to merge the existing indicators and make it also more palatable for policymakers. Because I know from my own experience, when I was a political advisor for the health minister, and in the Netherlands, the country that I know best, we wanted to also introduce more social indicators, also relate to the importance of health for bigger parts of society. I vividly remember we had a conversation with a finance minister who was a smart guy and he got the concept, but he looked at us and said, well, but this is changing the way we operate. This is changing the way we think about fiscal sustainability. So we don't have the right indicator. So I'm sorry, but we're not going to do it. And this is anecdotal. And I hope this is not the case perhaps anymore because this is some time ago. But it points to the importance of indicators. So what is your experience in Wales with it? And what can we learn from it at EU level?
So we have 50 national wellbeing indicators, which are supplemented by 16 national wellbeing milestones set for 2025. To give you a flavour of what those indicators are like, they monitor and measure things like child poverty, so the number of children in poverty, the air quality, so the level of NO2 or nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere, so kind of from cars and vehicles, all the way up to the level of homelessness, climate change and biodiversity are in there as well. And they each link to the wellbeing goals. As Derek said, we have a Wellbeing of Wales report that's published every year. And now that we have 10 years of the Act, we are up to 10 years of measurement of where we've gone. I think it's fair to say some aspects have gone really well and the Act has influenced really well. Other aspects maybe have gone the other way, which is a real shame. What those do is show a statistical change to the 50 indicators. What they maybe don't do is show the human impact of those changes on the ground. I think we're doing a review next year, subject to the election, which we've got coming up in May, of these indicators. And I think what would be really, really great, and what we're looking at trying to maybe do, is see that qualitative human aspect of those indicators. I'm not sure if that's what you did in your work in health, but having those numbers there is really important, especially from a high level kind of national political perspective. What we're seeing is that when we try and measure well-being, which is in its nature a subjective concept, it's not as solid as GDP in that, but neither should it be. But when we're trying to measure well-being, particularly at a regional or local level, what my colleagues are saying to me is that it's really hard to capture the impact that local well-being and regional measures are having. So if you bring in something to try and alleviate local healthcare pressures in your region, comparative to national or international impacts as well. A war in a different region or a different continent to you can have as much of an impact on food sustainability as a local impact, a local policy that you've brought in there. So I think indicators are useful in seeing the trend, especially as we've had them for 10 years, but we really are trying to move to a place now where we can see the human impact of well-being and future generations' impacts as well. One other aspect we're doing is as Derek said in his opening remarks, was the Future Trends report, So we're not just looking backwards with indicators, but now starting to look forward to trends of the future, whether it be those mega global trends or trends at a local or national level within Wales. When looking at those trends, it's also important not just to look at the quantitative side, so what the data is showing, but also look at how we as a population, how children and young people, how our diverse, would be that background and ethnicity, or be that socioeconomic diversity, or gender, is the impacts that those statistical trends and the quantitative trends will have on us and our perception of where we see the future going. AI is a really good example of this. So, there's clear quantitative trends of how AI can bring in productivity, or the other side of it, how it can impact on our climate change and our nature emergencies. But what does that actually mean to people on the ground in Wales, and how do we perceive those areas? And what we see in early topics and conversations of this with young people is that some are excited for it and use it as part of their education. Others are really scared about the impact it will have on job markets or on climate change, or on kind of more kind of dystopian images of AI. So I think, just to round off, I think we've got pretty good measurements of indicators from a statistical point of view, but I think really localizing that and having it on a human level is really important.
And just react to what you said, because the conversation you referred to was not pointing at a lack of indicators. We need data, that is for sure. I mean, but do we have data about mental health of the young generations? Yes, we do. Do we have data about climate change? Yes, we do. Do we have data about wealth inequality? Yes, we do. Do we have data about equality? Yes, we do. So we have already piles of data. And actually, interestingly, on climate change, basically the watershed report was the Club of Rome report when I was 9 in 1972, the Limits to Growth report. And ever since, we have piled up more and more and more and more data. So data is not what we lack. We should have, if we had data-driven policy making, we would have started acting about climate change, let's say, in the late 70s, to give politicians a bit of time to digest the Limits to Growth report. We didn't. So are indicators the missing link? No, I don't believe that. The missing link is, again, vision and political courage, because if the system we are in exists, it is because it delivers. But the question is, what does it deliver and to whom? And indeed, we should entertain no illusions about the power issues and the vested interests, because they exist. I mean, it's not by chance that we got into the economic system that we are in. And indeed, changing things in order to rebalance interests of the current generation versus future generations, it takes vision and courage. That is, to me, the missing link. Not so much data. Data we have plenty of. And so then the question is, how do you get courageous people into decision-making positions? And that's a whole question about democracy, but that's a long discussion.
True, but then people would challenge you and say, well, but DDP we're using since basically World War II, and it's a very widely accepted indicator. I believe, Dirk, that you mentioned it is not part indeed of the act as such. And some people would argue, well, for future generations, fiscal sustainability is also important, not to endebt them in the future. So I agree that indeed there is enough data, but are we making it, let's say, simple enough for governments also to avoid discussions? Because I work a lot on healthcare, and I know that already for a very long time, the question is health a cost or an investment? And given the indicators that we use, it's always seen, or very often seen, as a cost. That's also why indeed prevention, which would be the smart thing to do, it would be a no-brainer. But still, and again, I've seen it when I was in government, and I see it today, prevention is so low in terms of, I think overall it's 0.7% if I'm not mistaken, whereas it should be much higher because the return on investment is clear. So we have data. So I agree with your point, but it's always easier, of course, to agree with people that already see a point. And the difficulty these days seems that given the very strong priority, and again, you illustrated very well that we need holistic policy making also when it comes to security and defense and competitiveness. And in the end of the day, everything is related. But some people, including, for example, my compatriot Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, simply say, well, it's black and white. It's either investment in defense or social welfare systems. And in his equation, it's clear where the money would go. And again, it's not I personally agree, but for the sake of discussion, these seem to be the challenges that we have.
Yeah, may I say that such a statement is ideological? I mean, we know where Mark Rutte is coming from, and so it's only logical that he says that, because he has been saying that all along in his political career, so that he is using his position to basically stay his course. Fair enough, but that doesn't mean that there are trade-offs to be made. Obviously, we have spent too little on defense over the last 3 decades. That's obvious. Well, not enough to deter aggression, because we thought, I would say policymakers thought that aggression would never come from Russia until the very last days before the full-scale aggression in Ukraine. There were still many who were saying, well, no, don't worry, you will never do this. He did. And of course, making trade-offs, and we have to recognize them as trade-offs, means making people unhappy. And again, that is where the courage element is important, that you don't get anything for nothing. And when it comes to effort sharing, justice is absolutely crucial. That indeed, when we need to roll up our sleeves, everyone wants to see everyone rolling up his or her sleeves, and not some of them, basically enjoying the ride while others are delivering the efforts. But then again, when you say we should make simpler for politicians, well, there's a bias there that basically politicians are stupid, but I don't think...
It's not what I implied, but I like the point.
There was a bit of that, but again, data are there. But let me pick another example. We had these massive floods for 4 days. So 4 days of rain in the east of Belgium and west of Germany, and we have 200 people dead, and we have, for the Walloon region, a fiscal hit. Well, no, a hit to the economy of 4 billion. 4 days, 1 billion a day. So logically, you say, okay, I want to do prevention. I had the discussion with a Walloon member, a member of the Walloon Parliament yesterday. And she told me, well, it's striking that in one municipality, they are building social housing on floodable ground. And it has been identified as such. It's in that region. Well, why is it? Well, because the municipality owns the place and spent money to buy the ground. And actually, you would need to say this ground is worth nothing anymore. And indeed, saying that you can't build in all these areas that can be flooded, you are going against the interests of those people who own the land. Because the land overnight is worth nothing. That requires political courage. And oh, by the way, building social housing in a place that can be flooded, again, has a distributional impact because, of course, it's not, well, social housing is not made for people who are well off. So again, going after, well, taking decisions that basically hit vested interests, and you have vested interests all over the place, requires courage and vision. And the key element there, in order to gain acceptability, is, of course, the fact that there's a recognition that something needs to be done. And there, I would say, all societies, be it on defense, on climate, on aging, on digital, on all these things, on pollution, I think that all societies, by and large, recognize these necessities. But that's only the first condition. The second is, of course, that when you take political decisions, they are seen as answering to these necessities. But the third element, I mentioned it, is the most crucial, is justice. Because indeed, if you are going against some vested interests, but not others, then basically you lose credibility. Because people will say, yeah, you try to sell us efforts, but actually some people get away doing nothing. And then you lose politically. Again, well, you might say it's overdone, but this is to me the discourse of Winston Churchill in July 1940, facing a huge challenge for the United Kingdom and basically promising blood, sweat and tears. But when you look at the distributional impact of the war effort on the UK, you can say it was pretty well spread across society. And I would even say that in wars, capital owners tend to lose more than others because of capital destruction. But again, that is crucial for acceptance. Absolutely crucial. But it takes courage. And I'm not seeing enough of that. And frankly, the very reason why I joined von der Leyen is because she has that. And she has demonstrated time and over again. And Derek, I wanted to reflect to one thing you said. Think of the youngest person you know. And for me, it's Nora. She will be born mid-April. And actually, it goes to the bond that I have with von der Leyen, because we are both grandparents. We are both humanists, I would say. And this is our compass. We know what we do politically. We know whom we are doing it for. And that is extremely powerful. And that gives you the compass. And you're right. It is not numbers. It is faces of people we know. And that changes everything.
Thanks for that. I am turning to you again. I see we have a question, so my colleague will come to you with a mic. And if you just briefly could say your name and your affiliation, that would be helpful.
Hello, my name is Julia from EFOC. I have a question regarding citizens' participation and engagement on intergenerational fairness. Derek, you have mentioned the national conversation you had on the future of Wales before coming up with the Act. The European Commission ran a European Citizens panel last year in the forerun of the strategy that will be hopefully published today. And I was part of the European Citizens panel on that, so which was a great experience. But now I'm wondering what comes next, because also, Derek, you mentioned citizens' engagement is very important in the implementation of well-being and the intergenerational fairness aspects. So I'm wondering, so two questions, Lloyd, to you. What is Wales, for example, doing when implementing in the doing of intergenerational and well-being aspects? How do you actually really involve citizens in the doing? And to Philippe as well, do you have any a clue if for the implementation of the IGF strategy on EU level there will be further elements of citizens engagement being used to make sure that the very valid suggestions that citizens actually did on health, education, on defense and security, that they will be implemented, and also maybe use citizens engagement as a continuous check in that recommendations, but also the vision is actually being achieved. And maybe it's not only indicators that help us there, but also checking in with citizens whether they feel, it was an emotional check-in, that we are on the right track. And maybe as an optional question also to Philippe, because you were complaining a bit that maybe the pressure from civil society is missing to keep us going into the right direction. Do you think that these kind of citizens engagement formats can be a sort of substitute or an addition of to show this societal pressure?
Thanks for that very good point, citizen engagement. So Lloyd, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you for that, for those questions. I don't know if Derek maybe is able to come in and mention his report, which I know brought in children and young people, but I can give from the government perspective, it's, as I said, it's more difficult involving children and young people, I think, into policy design from a purely professional perspective, because by and large they're not in the workforce, and kind of less engaged through those channels. So we have different formal structures to try and do that. We have a Welsh Youth Parliament, which sits and discusses lots of they kind of choose their own political aspects to kind of feed into the main Welsh Parliament. I would say that just having those formal structures aren't always the only solution to this. They're often not wholly representative of the whole young person and children landscape. So there are then other avenues we have to do, and we have a children's commissioner. I'm probably not the best person to speak on that, but they work quite closely with government on bringing in the voice of the child and the voice of young people. Also, a lot of people in the room today are part of the Future Generations Leadership Academy, which is run by Derek and his office. I was also on that academy, as were many other people across government, across public sector, across the voluntary sector. That's for young people more than children, so 18 to 30-year-olds, but it teaches through the lens of the Act and through the lens of the goals, and particularly the 5 ways of working of collaboration, integration, involvement, long-term thinking and prevention, teaches them the skills to lead up and be future leaders in this space and bring in the voice of young people into all decision-making aspects. And what we're starting to see in that, and I'm seeing in my kind of day-to-day, is these young leaders sitting in those organizations speaking up about better policy decision-making, be that preventative policy, be that long-term thinking and using foresights and futures thinking skills or systems thinking skills, to speak to their CEOs, to speak to their directors, to speak to, I speak to politicians as well, and drive forward better decision-making or more aligned decision-making to well-being and to future generations thinking. So, for example, in our transport body, Transport for Wales, they have recently joined the Act in 2024. They now come under there as a statutory body. They're the kind of person who drove forward their well-being objectives, which are 4 high-level objectives about how they'll bring in well-being into their senior decision-making and strategic decision-making. Was on the academy, is a young person. I believe she's still under 30. I don't know her exact age, but she's a young person drawing in young person's experiences, thinking about the lived experience that she's had and had with kind of her people or kind of age group. In terms of bringing in the voice of the child and the voice of young people, we're trying to develop it more in the involvement we do in consultations and in other aspects. It's, there are different forums we use to try and do that. But I'll go back to the Future Trends report that we're doing, which is using the data that we have on where the future might be to inform human insights of children and young people and what their perception of that can be, with the long-term aspiration, and we'll see if this happens or not, of informing and influencing policy making from politicians and from kind of other policymakers across the public bodies in Wales. I'll close it there.
Philippe, then there was a question for you as well.
Yeah, so I don't know whether the strategy that will be unveiled today will include further citizens panels, but I know that they are there to stay. I mean, the methodology is there to stay in the European Commission. That's for sure. It won't change. And I do see personally such panels as very useful. And actually, to me, I will never forget the citizens conference on climate that Macron launched years ago in France. It was remarkable to see how 150 randomly selected citizens had precisely the courage to propose really daring measures. I mean, can you imagine proposing to reduce the max speed on the motorways in France from 130 to 110? Well, that really takes guts. And actually, I was told how it happened. It was a citizen Well, first, when the idea was floated at the beginning of the conference, it was met with booing by people. And then someone said, well, I'll investigate this a bit more. And that someone was working in road transport sector. And he came to the conclusion that actually in terms of cost, in terms of environmental impact, in terms of safety, it would basically deliver huge benefits for relatively minor efforts in terms of losing a few minutes every hour. And then he pleaded for it. It was someone from road transport pleading for it, saying, well, actually, if we are not prepared to do such a minimal effort that costs us so little, we will never fulfill the climate objectives. And he got the majority of the citizens panel with him. This is really democracy at work for me. So yes, that is an important part, but is this a substitute for public pressure? No, it's part of it, but the first public pressure is, sorry to be old-fashioned, it's elections. I mean, why do we see policy swings in member states and at European level? Well, because majorities are different. That is where it starts. And again, back to Brexit, I mean, the majority of young people in the UK didn't want to leave. But if you don't bother to vote, sorry, your voice doesn't matter. Sorry, because this is still the way we measure opinion in the most direct way. Second, it is indeed not just at election time, it is pressure all along. And that means public actions, demonstrations, and all the rest of it. And that is absolutely needed too, and there's no substitute for that. So the feeling is that today, people are more, let me say, 3/4 of the population is worried about climate and demands climate action, but even more than 3/4 of the population is economically worried. So it's often the same people. You cannot just answer one worry without answering the other one. But these worries are visible in opinion polls, in elections, but also when people demonstrate. And that influences the calculus of political decision makers. Yes, it does.
We have 5 minutes left and we now have 3 questions. So what I propose, we first take the questions and then indeed the two of you have still some time for a short reaction to that. So we have the question in the back, please.
Yes, hi, thank you. Nicolas Stenger from the European Economic and Social Committee. Mr. Lamberts, you've talked about compass and goals, indicators. In 2015, one of the major achievements in global multilateralism was the adoption of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda, which is a compass, a global compass. In the past few years, at the EU level, at the Commission, the SDGs have disappeared. When we look at the work program for 2025-2026, for example, there is zero mention of the agenda or the SDGs anymore. In the State of the Union of von der Leyen, SDGs are not mentioned or almost not. So we do have a global compass. Why is it disappearing from the Commission and from the communication at the Commission level? Thank you.
Then we have Valentina, and then just behind Valentina we have, let's take that as the last question. If you have bilateral questions, please feel free to stay afterwards.
Yes, hello, I'm Valentina Caimi, working at the European Policy Center on the MERGE project that has been mentioned. Well, we have heard, we have data, we have evidence, we have indicators, we have frameworks, we have a compass, but the well-being economy is still happening here and there. But not really in an integrated way. We have cases of member states where you have a well-being framework, but then this is not reflected in policy making. It's always very difficult to have budgetary decisions that take into account integrated policies. So my question is really, what do we need to do? Yeah, for sure we need courage, and we need maybe different kind of politicians, and we need the majority. But very concretely, how do we change the culture of politicians that still focus on the short termism, and of the public administration that tends to work in silos. And I was also curious to know, how do you engage with the private sector?
And we have, because I see now more hands. Let's take your question as the last one, because I'm afraid that we're really approaching time. So if you have a bilateral question, you can perhaps ask it afterwards. There you go.
Thank you very much. My name is Bela Kuschlich. I work for the Jesuit European Social Center. And my question is to Mr. Lamberts on this: why are young people not voting enough? And I generally agree with what you are saying, but also there is an important structural issue here, that in our current demographic trends, which are probably here to stay for a very long time, young people will remain a minority forever. And even though the European Green Deal, you said, was a large part because of democratic pressure, thanks to, again, young people, Greta Thunberg, and the whole movement around climate. But still, if they go to vote and everyone goes to vote, then older people will have a lot more votes in general. And I don't see this trend changing. So then we will have that perspective always overrepresented in a way. And this will lead to policy proposals that favor those larger groups, just because of basically taking the logic of your argument. So we need something else to promote longer term perspectives in democracy, because we can't change demography.
You both have a few minutes to react, perhaps starting with you, Mr. Lambert, and you have the last word, Lloyd.
First, on SDGs, to me, what matters is substance, not logos, right? So if SDGs are not explicitly mentioned, okay, fine. But the real question is the general course of action of the European Commission running against the SDGs? And there we need to have a discussion about specifically on housing or this or that or that. Is it rather in the good direction, or is it running against the SDGs? But to me, fighting to have a mention of the SDGs is not what matters. What matters is substance, and substance in this case is policy actions. And there we can have the discussion whether it's enough, fast enough, or is it going against the SDGs. I would say that I much prefer to be today a Commission official than a US government official on SDGs. And you might say that's an easy choice to be made. But then again, how many places are there on Earth who really are caring about SDGs, about climate, etc.? We can discuss about that. What you said, I really don't get it. You say, okay, demography we can't change, and indeed I would agree with that. That the determinants of demography are by and large beyond the control of policymakers. But I wouldn't agree with what you say, that basically if young people would vote more, they would vote for all parties the same way, and it wouldn't make difference. I think that empirical evidence shows that we do have generational differences in voting patterns. And I would even say that we have gender difference in voting patterns, that in many countries, young men vote for far right and young women vote for progressive parties. Typically Greens. So no, it's not a given. But then again, sorry, the basic of democracy is one person, one vote. And I do not see that it is wrong to say, well, if that basically, well, the general interest is about more than the majority interest. Don't take me wrong. But then again, that basically we take into account the votes that are expressed is not wrong for me. And indeed, if there are less young people, indeed, they will numerically weigh less. But then again, their voting patterns might be totally different and have a different impact. Sorry. And on Brexit, it was obvious. If the proportion of people who went to the booth would have been the same for young people, Brexit would have failed. It would have failed. It would have made a massive difference. So it's at the margin, that you make a difference. And indeed, we are witnessing that in the European Parliament today. I won't get into the details, but the swings were not that big electorally, but they swung where the majority lies. And that is the law of democracy. Sorry about this. I remain, before being a Green and whatever, I'm a Democrat. And indeed, I do believe that this is our common treasure that we need to preserve. But I recoil at saying, well, we should find ways to basically overcome what we perceived as the limitations of democracy. So, I know that this can quickly lead to what is called enlightened despotism, and the difference between enlightened despotism and pure autocracy is not that big. So, democracy first.
I should say that we actually had a conversation about this yesterday as a delegation of people from Wales with the EU Youth Forum, I believe they were called. We've brought in votes for 16-year-olds into Wales. That's our election in a few months. We'll have 16-year-olds voting. And from that conversation yesterday, I'm going to kind of paraphrase what was discussed and make a statement based on one conversation. But it was that quite often it's confidence. 16-year-olds and young people not kind of back that discussion of, well, we don't know about politics, but there's people of all ages who don't know about politics, and just because a part of young people don't understand, I mean they do understand, but just maybe the kind of don't follow Parliament kind of daily or read the news daily doesn't mean that their voice shouldn't be heard. And I agree, we need to find ways to try and bring those voices more into being heard. On the question on wellbeing economy, I was at a conference last year in Iceland in Reykjavik called the Wellbeing Economy Forum. It was really interesting. We were in a building called the Harper Building. If anyone's been to Reykjavik, it's a lovely building, and it's got two big conference rooms. And in the one conference room, we had leaders from across Europe and the globe, people from New Zealand. I was there as a representative of the Wellbeing Economy Governments Network. And we were all discussing the wellbeing economy, how we can bring in the terminology we should use to standardize it. I think that's one of the main issues with it, is that there's not, the circular economy, foundation economy. There's not one kind of methodology of what the wellbeing economy could be. But in the room next to it, there was a European bank. There was a European Bank Forum, which was, I'm assuming the discussion was purely on monetary policy and GDP. And not once did the two conferences come and discuss together. And so you ended up with two rooms of people who agreed with each other discussing about those policies. And I think it would have been brilliant if on that week we could have brought the two conferences together and actually had a challenging discussion about how we move from almost traditional forms of economic discourse into these new and what is still, I think, an emerging idea of the wellbeing economy. There is no one way that we can do that, and it will be different for different nations and for the European Union. It'll be different to what it is for the US or for Asian markets and aspects. But I think, it's not. Personally, I don't think it's gone beyond the people who believe in it yet, and it needs to take that step to take critique as well.
Many, many thanks. I believe the fact that we still have remaining questions shows that this is an ongoing conversation. So Gianluca, and to you, sorry that there wasn't time, but I hope that you can stay a bit and perhaps ask your questions bilaterally. But I really believe that Derek and Lloyd, that is because of the fact that you share the Welsh perspective. It really is very inspiring for us at the European level as well, and also the institutions and the regions and the countries that we represent. And Philippe, thinking also to bringing us back time and again on the notion of courage. I believe that is what is needed. And I'm sure that some of you, perhaps while we spoke, have been following the presentation of Commissioner Mikalev. I hope that we see that courage reflected in the Commission's intergenerational fairness strategy as well. So with that, I would like to thank everyone. Of course, Derek, many thanks for being here. Philippe, many thanks. Lloyd, many thanks also for bringing in also the younger perspective, because that's very important. And I really also like, perhaps for us also going forward, to think indeed about that younger person we all know, because that should inspire us to think about future generations. Before we break up, I hope you enjoyed being at EPC. We will have on the 29th of April, a workshop on intergenerational fairness. It's online, so even those of you, perhaps colleagues already listening in online, or perhaps those of you that will not be in Brussels on the 29th, you can join us remotely. And my colleague Valentina is here in case you would like to have more details, or perhaps her email address in order to get the registration details. And if in general you're not not following the EPC yet, please follow us on epc.eu because we have many events. Also later this month, we have another event where Commissioner Mikalev will come to the EPC to present the strategy. And I've been led to believe that that's the first time he comes to a non-commissioned stakeholder. So it promises to be an interesting event. So please follow us and I hope to see you again. Thank you so much.